If you're looking for a solid, reliable opening for white, then you've come to the right place. The Colle-Koltanowski system is easy to learn, and it can also pack a powerful punch, as we'll see. So let's dive right in. It begins with d4, and we'll take a look first at the main line where black plays in the most common way with d5. Now, knight to f3. The reason that you want to play this first is that we want to prevent black from ever playing e5. If black does play e5, then the plans change, and we want to keep this as simple as possible. So knight to f3 prevents black from playing e5. Knight to f6, e3. The continuation here that white is going for is to put the bishop on d3. The queenside knight is going to come to d2, and then white is going to castle kingside. So let's see this in action. e6, where black is preparing to develop. Bishop to d3, and now c5. Now you can expect this move from black. If black plays c5, the thing that you need to remember is that you should respond to this with c3, reinforcing the central pawn on d4. So if c5, then c3. If black captures on d4 at any point, then you want to recapture with the e-pawn. The reason for this is that before the capture, the dark squared bishop was shut in, couldn't easily get out because of the pawn on e3. But after this capture, the dark squared bishop has got a clear diagonal now. So black would actually be doing you a favor if he made that trade. But let's say that black instead held the tension and played knight to c6 instead. Well then, just continue the development. The knight comes out to d2. It might look a little bit awkward on this square, but the idea is to play e4 eventually, and the knight from d2 supports that. So bishop to e7, and both sides castle. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, I'd invite you to subscribe to the channel. I do all kinds of content on chess, so by subscribing you won't miss out on any of my future content. And now queen to e2 is played. We're following a common line from master level play here, and queen to e2 is preparing even more forces to play the e4 pawn break. This is the key pawn break that white is often looking to play in the Colle system. So the knight, the bishop, the queen, they're all supporting e4. So queen to c7, and now there's a couple of lines we're going to look at here. The first one was played in Alyakin versus Floor 1932, and that's the immediate e4. Now this is not to everyone's taste, but it is a matter of personal preference. The thing about this is that black can force an isolated queen's pawn through the following moves, which were played in the game. So capturing on e4 first, and notice how this knight, which looked awkward, springs to life and captures on e4. So that was the point of having it there. And this is how black can force the isolated pawn, by capturing c takes d4 at this moment. Because after all these captures, this is an isolated pawn. Now, if you're a intermediate to advanced level player, you probably know all about isolated pawns and the pros and cons of them, but in brief, this isolated pawn can be weak in an endgame because it doesn't have any of its friendly pawns on either side. The white c-pawn and e-pawn have been traded off the board, so this pawn is on its own. So it can be weak in an endgame, but it can also give attacking possibilities. Like I say, it's a bit double-edged, it's not to everyone's taste, but if you like attacking chess, just as Alexander Alyakin did, then it can work for you. We'll just take a few more moves into this game, because we saw that black became very aggressive, tried to win this pawn, but after white defended and black tried to insist on winning the pawn, well, there was a strong intermezzo first, and eventually black did win the pawn, but at a terrible price. There was a attack on this rook. If the rook were to leave the d file, then white would simply be able to win a piece this way. The bishop can't move because of the pin. So in the game, rook to d7 was played, but this is very awkward. The rook is blocking the development of the light squared bishop, and Alekhine took full advantage of this with a sacrifice and pretty quickly won decisive material and went on to win the game. But you won't always get that kind of thing. So what a lot of people prefer instead is to avoid the isolated pawn. So delay playing e4. And the way that you can do that is by following the game Koltanowski versus Almeida 1935, where white captured on c5 first. So black took back, and then e4 was played. Again, this is a video about the opening, so I don't want to go too deep into the game, but we'll just take a look at how the game could continue from here. Let's say that black goes back, and then there's some more pressure on the possibility of playing e5, and if e5 is played, then of course black would be in some danger. So knight to g4 was played, and through a series of captures and trades, it actually ended up being black who had the isolated pawn. So I think one of the real skills in the Colle-Koltanowski system is dealing with this tension in the center in a position like this. I mean, if you play e4, you have to consider, what if black takes d takes e4? What if black plays c takes d4? What if black holds the tension? So it does lead to quite a rich position where some calculation is required, but you haven't had to memorize too much in order to get here. There's some players out there who love opening memorization. They like the openings with long critical lines to remember, because by playing openings like that, they have a chance to outwork their opponents with superior preparation before the game even begins. Now, the Colle-Koltanowski system is totally different. With this, you're just going to reliably reach a middle game position from where you're going to have to think for yourself. If you need some help deciding on what opening repertoire is right for you, then click the link in the description below. I work with ambitious adult improvers at the below 2000 ELO level to improve all aspects of their chess, including the opening. So click the link and we can see if working together will be a good fit. Okay, so now that we've seen what to do against the main lines, I also need to prepare you for what to do if black plays in an alternative way. An alternative way which is also very common. So let's check it out. d4, d5, knight f3, knight c6, e3, preparing bishop to d3. But what do you do if black plays their light squared bishop out early? Bishop to f5, or maybe bishop to g4. If you play the Colle system, you're definitely going to see this at some point. Now, if you do encounter this, the plans change. The Colle system has a reputation for being able to play the same moves against almost everything that black does, but the key word there is almost everything. This early development of the light squared bishop is an alarm bell that should go off in your mind telling you that you should change your plan, and that change of plan is going to involve an early c4. So this strikes at black's center, but more importantly, it opens up this diagonal for the white queen. The downside of bringing out the light squared bishop early like this, and the reason that you don't see it very often at master level, is that it weakens the b7 square. The light squared bishop back here was guarding b7, but once it moves out, then that's no longer the case. So let's look at a few reasonable moves here for black. I mean, there's a few different ways that black can play, but I just want to get this idea across. e6, okay, so now queen to b3. This attacks the pawn. So what could black do here? Well, if he takes the knight, then you can take on b7, and the rook in the corner is under attack, so black really has to move their knight out to add the queen as a defender to that rook, and then you can take the bishop. I know that this pawn structure looks a little bit ugly, but white is a pawn up, and therefore white is better. So back here, what else could black do? I think another response that you could easily see here is b6, but in this case you can play knight to e5. This attacks black's light squared bishop. If you play c6, well then you can just grab the bishop and you've got the bishop pair, and I think a very nice position. If he tries to move the bishop out of the way, well then black is actually quite weak on the light squares here. You can get these captures and then this check, and this is very uncomfortable indeed for black. This light squared bishop could go back, I suppose, but then you can take it and there's a pin, and yeah, it's not really very nice for black to play this. White's position is much better, as you can see from the evaluation bar. The other move that you might see after queen to b3 is queen to c8, defending the pawn this way. If you see that, again, you can play knight to e5, attacking the bishop, and white's plan from here will be knight to c3, bishop to d2, and rook to c1. Once you've been able to play rook to c1, then it's on the same file as the black queen, on the c file, and at some point you can capture, open up the file, and make life very uncomfortable for the black queen staring at a white rook on c1. So those are the basic plans. Again, there's not a lot of memorization involved here. You just need to play the moves as you see them. It's one of the benefits of playing the Colle system after all. You don't need to memorize too much, but just have this idea in mind. If you see an early development of the light squared bishop, then your mind should switch to c4 and queen to b3, attacking the pawn on b7. So now that we've covered off the main opening ideas, I want to switch to thematic middle game ideas. The first is from a position reached in a game played in 1929 between two players with difficult to pronounce names. Let's just leave it at that. Anyway, it's white to play here, and white played the thematic middle game pawn break that you often see in the Colle-Koltanowski system, e4. So black captured on d4 first, giving white this isolated pawn. Now this is okay. As I mentioned earlier, this gives white good attacking chances, and as we'll see, that turned out to be the case. So black played b6 with the idea of bringing the bishop to b7, and then after bishop to g5, black chose to capture on e4, and the notable thing here is how white chose to recapture. White chose to play rook takes e4. Now this is a bit unusual looking perhaps. Usually you leave the rooks on the first rank for a bit longer. You don't bring them into the middle of the board like this, but here it has a good idea. The idea is to bring it over to h4, the so-called rook swing. So bishop to b7 was played. Now a strong intermezzo, attacking the queen first, forcing it away to a worse square. And then rook to h4. Now this is very tough for black now. What can black do? There's two white pieces attacking the pawn on h7. You can't bring the knight here because white will just take it and then take on h7 next move. So instead, if you play h6, then there's a sacrifice here, taking on h6 with the bishop, followed up by queen to d2, and there's not really much that black can do here to survive. Queen takes h6 is unstoppable, and the black king lacks defenders. There's just all of black's pieces are over on the queen side, far from the king. And if you play instead, as in the game, g6, well then black ended up becoming very weak on the dark squares. This move attacked the knight, and I'm not going to show too much more of the game, but basically white ended up pinning a lot of black's forces, and pretty soon there was a sacrifice. Well, not actually even a sacrifice, a temporary sacrifice, because actually white gained two minor pieces for the rook and went on to win. We'll finish off with this thematic tactic, which is well worth bearing in mind if you play the Colle-Koltanowski system. This occurred in Lewick versus Raunak 2013, and white has just played e4, the standard middle game pawn break. So black captured on e4, and remember the job of the knight on d2 is to recapture on e4. Now normally black should trade knights on e4, but let's see what happens if black doesn't do that, because in the game black instead played bishop to b7. Very natural, right? In fact, probably the most natural move in the world, just developing the last piece to the diagonal that you had intended to develop it to. But the problem with this is that white can capture on f6, and if you capture with the queen, then after bishop to g5, the queen is trapped. So black is, of course, dead lost. in that line. So in the game, black had to play g takes f6, but now the black king was wide open. White was able to start creating threats with knight to h4, and then the queen came in, and eventually the bishop came in, and pretty soon black lost the exchange and went on to lose the game. To continue your education in this opening, click here to see a game which Colle himself played using the opening which bears his name. You'll see more thematic middle game ideas which you can use to play the Colle system even more strongly.